To recall the member for Bowman.
Deputy Speaker, this afternoon has been a very, very important revelation, I think, for the Australian people, that there can be coherent and passionate debate in this chamber, and I hope that will continue this afternoon. It's obviously now not up to me to restate the positions of both sides, but it's become pretty clear that this is a debate about two irreconcilable policy areas. On the one hand, the human rights issue for which we are defending, and on the other side, a determination to stick with a Malaysia solution. And that gives us a fairly simple scenario to conduct this debate. So I would like to cover in my brief time available some of the moral inconsistencies that this debate is grappling with. Secondly, talk about some of the realities that exist in source countries that have not been addressed. And then thirdly, talk about where we can potentially go from here in the way of solutions. One of the great frustrations for the Australian people, I would say, in this debate, which has moved the arrival of boats from overseas and to probably policy prominence, the top 1, 2 or 3 reasons that we'd be talking politics around a barbecue, the top 1, 2 or 3 reasons that a good government had lost its way 2 years ago. The reason it has reached this position, Deputy Speaker, was because of what happened in 2008 and 2009, when the Australian government, slowly, like that young Dutch boy in the parable, picked away at the moat. That's right, unravelled slowly the protections that were put in place in years before, and then waited for the inevitable. And what occurred, if you think about that parable, was that suddenly now what has happened over the last few months has brought home to them the horrible reality that not only was there no willingness on this side of the chamber to address the problem, but now, in a time of crisis, this government is learning they may not be able to address it legislatively. There has been a bill sitting for months and months that could have been brought here to be debated. And there is only one thing that this side of the chamber has stood for, and that is to listen to the High Court's decision on section 198, of the Act, which says that we will, on this side, protect the rights of people who are resettled. And we are the side of politics that is doing that today. And let no one standing up there forget that if there is one thing that holds up this legislation, be it from the government or be it handed to the member for Lyne with a little bit of dill and dressing and passed off as an independent bill, the same issue stands, Deputy Speaker, is that we have a government here fundamentally unable to let go of its Malaysian deal. It was an opposition that placed above all things human rights. This was the great Australian Labor Party tradition. And I wonder now about the sorry carapace that is left on this side of the chamber, because the one thing they're prepared to trade away is now the very thing the opposition is standing firm on. Because no political party in any civilised Western democracy should ever pass up human rights as a way of getting an expedient political solution. I remember a mate of mine, Jay Ryan, in San Francisco, he used to say, always prefer a punt to a sack. And that's exactly what this side is doing on human rights, so that they can get a quick solution. And that should not be something that this Australian Parliament will ever do. That's why we will stand firm on that. Now, let's just now examine how they have worked very hard on that side of the chamber to narrow this debate down to being a squabble between two irreconcilable ideologies. No, that's not the case at all. This is a Labor Party that stood up for human rights once. Whether you take the utilitarian approach or the Catholic social theological approach, you look after those who are most vulnerable. But you've lost sight of that. I mean, the first arrival that appears on our shores, and you forget about the situation in source countries, and the previous speaker on the other side made that so clear. If you go to Afghanistan and you see the suffering, then you must equally consider those vulnerable people who can't get onto a commercial flight and fly to Southeast Asia, as you do the ones who arrive. They deserve equal consideration, and I think that's a thoroughly reasonable proposition. We spend less than 5% on border processing in Quetta and Pakistan as we do on last gasp situations here in our northern oceans. We've simply forgotten and lost the opportunity to do cross-border processing. There's no dialogue with these nations. Remember also that half of all arrivals come from democratically supported governments. Those source countries have democracies. Most of their problems are internecine and sectarian. That's not what the treaty was set up for. And yet we could be working with those countries at source, but there's no talk of that from this government. Let me remind everyone, we are a Westminster democracy. If a government cannot negotiate with the crossbenchers, if a government cannot negotiate with the opposition and get it through the Senate, then we are debating today nothing more than a zombie bill. and it's the walking dead bill that we killed off in the Senate. What we need to do is find some ground from the government.
The member's time has expired. The member for Bowman will take his seat.